And so let me move on to the next talk. The next speaker is Anne Collins, and she's an assistant professor at UC Berkeley, Department of Psychology, and Helen Will's Neuroscience Institute. And the title is One-Shot Intrinsic Reward Valuation in Humans. So, please.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm very honored to be here. Let me share my screen. Okay, can you see my slides? Great.
Yes.
So today I'm going to talk to you about a specific kind of reward signals in humans, and I'm sorry in advance, I don't have dopamine measurements, but I have as close as you can get in humans. So what do we mean when we talk about rewards? Well, the first thing that comes to mind is things like that, like chocolate, something that has two kinds of effects on us. They make us feel happy and satisfied. It's rewarding. But they also make us want to repeat whatever we did to get that outcome, like pleading with big eyes to your parents or something like that for chocolate. Okay, so that's the reinforcing effect of reward. And what I'm interested in understanding is whether there are more signals that serve as reinforcers for human learning than we've been considering in the past. And I study this in the context of reinforcement learning, where we consider that the agent is in a given state and then makes a choice that leads to what we call a reward that then we use to update a reinforcement learning for a reinforcement learning algorithm or policy between state and choice. And the key ingredient here for this update is the reward prediction error, difference between the reward and the expected value for a given state and action. That we then use to update this expected value. I'm going quickly through this, as I assume this is well known by everybody here. So dopamine obviously has been shown, as we've seen in the previous talks and a lot in the past, to encode something like reward prediction error. And to forward this information to multiple places in the brain, in particular to the striatum, where it's thought to contribute via dopaminergic dependent plasticity to this kind of reinforcement learning. So the question I want to ask today is how we set this reward function. How does the brain know? How does the brain set this reward function? And how abstract can this be and flexible? So we know that primary reinforcers like glucose are felt as rewarding and reinforcing. And here I'm going to show brain slices highlighting the effect in the striatum here, for example, of glucose, but also of secondary reinforcers like money, things that are not initially reinforcing, but that we learn over time to associate with a rewarding outcome. Or even more abstract kind of outcomes like green circles, if you're instructed that that's the positive outcome, or words like this, win or lose, that have no, not perceptually very similar, but that you've learned to associate with being rewarded or not rewarded. So those are well understood and well studied and well accepted as reinforcers. But I'm interested in something slightly different. I'm interested in extrinsically neutral outcomes and whether they can also serve as reinforcers. So let's take this example. Consider you have two variables of interest in your data assets, variable A and B, and you plot them against each other, and you get this outcome. Okay. This is extrinsically neutral. It doesn't have a value per se. But if your goal was to show that variables A and B were independent, then getting this graph would feel rewarding, while getting this other one would feel non-rewarding. And vice versa, if your goal instead was to show that variable A is a predictor of variable B, the exact same outcomes would have the exact opposite value. Okay, so it seems like our brain is able to really flexibly assign a reward function to those outcomes in a way that's dependent on high-level executive function, what your goal at a given time is. So I want to understand how we do that and whether it is indeed not just rewarding, but also reinforcing. And what I'll try to ask today is whether single-shot sub-goals, sub-goals that you just get that are new, reinforce our choices, and whether they do so by recruiting canonical reinforcement learning processes in our brain. And so what about one-shot goals? And the reason we thought that might be the case is that it's well known that while dopamine phasic signaling or striatal activity measured in humans carries reward prediction error signals, it also carries a lot of information not related to extrinsic rewards. And I think the previous talks gave some information about that, but there's lots of literature on that, like information reward, novelty, feedback, novelty information, context-dependent rewards, and even sub-goals, as shown in humans, or goals. This hasn't necessarily been shown to be reinforcing, but it's been shown to influence dopaminergic information. There's also good evidence that dopaminergic information integrates higher level type of information, like context information, I think, like Mark just showed in his talk. Okay, but also in humans, it's been shown that model-based or working memory information influence reward prediction errors. And it's also known that these signals can have very fast one-shot dynamics, for example, by signaling non-experienced reversals. So based on this, we hypothesized that action outcomes that realize a new single-shot extrinsically neutral goal, like seeing this cloud of points showing the correlation, for example, does recruit the brain's instrumental reward learning network as if it was experiencing an extrinsic reinforcer, like a primary or secondary reinforcer. And we also hypothesized that executive functions, and in particular working memory, would play a crucial role in helping us set this arbitrary reward function that is then used by the classic reinforcement learning neural network. So to test this question, we designed a new experiment for humans in the scanner. And I'll walk you through the experiment here. So one part of the experiment is fairly standard probabilistic reinforcement learning task. Prior to each trial, participants see which condition they're in. So this is the beginning of a trial that's a classic reward condition where participants are cued that they can win 1 point or not win 1 point in this trial. Then participants choose between two shapes, two bandits. For example, here they choose the triangle and they get an outcome. Here the triangle was rewarded. On the next trial, they might be again in a reward condition, and they might pick again the triangle because it was rewarded last time and get rewarded again. And on the next trial, they might have another pair of shapes to choose from, and then go back to the previous pair, where they might pick the triangle again, and this time not get rewarded. So this isn't because there's a reversal, it's because the outcomes are probabilistic. So in this case, the triangle was the right thing to pick, but it's only rewarded 70% of the time. Okay, there's another type of trial, and that's the innovation here, in which participants are warned that this time they're not up for primary or secondary reinforcers, they're up for abstract fractal outcomes. And one of those is labeled a goal, and the other one is labeled a non-goal. Okay, so they have to encode this, so please try to encode it. And then they pick between two different, here they pick the diamond outcome. And this outcome is this fractal. And if you've encoded the pre-trial phase, you might remember that this was the goal. And if your overall overarching goal of the task is to try to reach your goal at each trial, then this might feel reinforcing because this was the goal. So next time you encounter this trial, you'll get a completely new pair of fractals. So you never see the fractals twice, but your goal is always to get to the fractal goal. Okay, So next time you see the diamond and the moon, you might pick again the diamond because the diamond led to your goal last time, and it gets you to your goal again. This part of the task is also probabilistic. So next time you see a brand new pair of fractals again at the beginning of your trial, and pick the diamond again, and this time you will get the outcome that's not the goal. Okay, so the task is like this. There's a pre-choice period where it indicates which type of trials you have, and you pick between two items and you get feedback. This is the familiar reward condition. Yoked with it is a single shot goal condition in which you first see the two potential outcomes for this trial. And again, those two potential outcomes change at every trial. So you can't learn to associate them with a positive outcome. You have to encode this on the fly at every trial. And then you pick between two items and then you get an outcome, in this case, the goal outcome. There's a total of 4 possible pairs of shapes. Because on top of the familiar versus single shot condition, we also cross this with an easy versus hard condition. The easy is probabilistic with 90-10 probability, and the hard one with 77-23% probability. And participants experience each choice 30 times for a total of 120 trials. Okay, so what's the behavior like? So participants are able to learn in both conditions to pick the item of the pair that's more likely to lead to rewards in the familiar condition, or that's more likely to lead to the goal fractals in the single shot condition. So they're able to learn in both cases, although they're slightly less good in the single shot goal condition than in the familiar condition. There's also an effect of difficulty as expected. This effect of difficulty is handy because it allows us to control for difficulty by comparing this dark gray bar to this light blue bar in the future. Next, we looked at reaction times, and we found that there was an effect of difficulty in reaction times. So participants were slower at making choices in the hard condition compared to the easy condition. But there was no effect of outcome condition. So participants were as fast at making choices in the goal condition compared to the reward condition. And that's striking for 2 reasons. It's striking because we could have expected a slowing down in the single shot goal condition, for example, because of the dual task nature of this condition, where you have to hold something in mind, the identity of the fractals while you're making a choice. It's also striking because it shows that it's not a different choice process, in a sense that we might think that participants would make choices in the single shot condition in a more goal-directed way. For example, trying to actively plan forward for which choice is more likely to lead to a specific type of goal. So the reaction time suggests that there's no planning or no dual task effect. That's not what explains this slightly lower performance here. That instead the choice process appears to be very similar. Last, we also measured participants' working memory in the ViDA and back task, and we showed that NBAC performance was a very strong predictor of learning in the single shot condition, but not in the familiar reward condition. So it seemed like working memory selectively correlates with single shot learning, even when we control for difficulty, for example, by comparing those two, showing that this single shot goal learning seems to specifically recruit working memory. We used the classic learning model to capture the behavior of participants. This is the basics of the equation where I did a few simple mechanisms like a sticked choice and asymmetric learning rates. And we were able to capture behavior best via a model that had 2 learning rates, one per condition, one for the reward condition and one for the goal condition. This model captured the data pretty well. The model here is in dotted lines. These are learning curves. And it did so by inferring a lower learning rate in the single shot condition compared to the familiar condition. So this shows us that the slightly worse performance in the single shot goal condition is captured by slower learning, which we think is relating to potential goal encoding lapses, where participants forget which of the two fractals is the good outcome. And again, it shows that the one-shot goal is not just a noisier choice process. So what we've seen so far is that humans learn instrumental value from new single-shot goals. And so they're presumably able to set this reward function on the fly at every trial. And the choice process in this single-shot condition is similar to classic reinforcement. Working memory seems to play a role in setting the goal's reward function. And we think that this weaker performance is due to occasional working memory failure in the goal maintenance. So what we want to ask now is whether those single-shot goal outcomes are indeed treated as familiar rewards by the brain's reinforcement learning network, and whether working memory maintenance provides this information to set the reward function. And so to do so, we put participants in the scanner and measure their bold signal in the brain. So the specific prediction we had is that if we have those networks in the brain, corticostriatal loops that use dopaminergic reward prediction error signaling to learn to make valuable choices, we know that upstream of dopamine neurons are areas signaling primary and secondary rewarding outcomes. So the question we have really is whether single-shot goals held in working memory can also provide this same information. And our prediction was that we should, if that's the case, then we should see downstream the same encoding of single-shot goals in familiar value, and that this should be working memory dependent. And I'd like to emphasize that this is not a trivial conclusion. There's multiple alternative predictions we could have made. For example, there's evidence in the literature that we could have expected qualitatively different responses to single-shot goals in a different network, such as the model-based network in the brain. So we do see evidence of recruitment of the control network, the executive function network, in the one-shot goal condition compared to the familiar condition. So here I'm showing you a whole brain contrast during this pre-trial period. And you see that the single-shot condition overactivates visual cortex, which is expected because of the complexity of the fractals, but also parietal and lateral prefrontal cortex areas, as well as hippocampus, which is all consistent with encoding into working memory of those fractals. At the time of outcome, again, we see a reactivation of lateral prefrontal cortex and visual cortex, which is consistent with retrieval. At the time of choice, we actually do not see any overactivation of the control network. So we can't pick on extended maintenance. So it seems like this one-shot goal condition more strongly recruits the working memory network, and that we do not find any evidence for a specific goal-directed choice process. So next, we wanted to ask about reinforcement learning signatures in regions of interest that are identified as relating to reward. And
you have 2 more minutes.
Yeah, thank you. And to do that, we predicted that the reward network as identified by the familiar condition should also support single-shot goal reinforcement learning representations. So we identified regions of interest from the familiar reward condition of for example, striatum here, orbitofrontal cortex, for valence, expected value, and reward prediction. And then we checked in a single-shot goal condition whether we could find whether those regions were also similarly activated by the same predictors. And that's what we found. We found effects of valence in the goal condition, in the striatum and hippocampus, effect of expected value, and effect of reward prediction errors or in the same regions as they were found for the reward. And this one wasn't significant, but once we did an encoding model of reward prediction error, instead we did find that striatum RP was encoded in the same way in the goal versus familiar condition. Okay, so canonical reward regions of interest also encode corresponding one-shot sub-goal signals. Last, we wanted to ask what the role of working memory was in setting this reward function. And our prediction was that the working memory network should prime the reinforcement learning system to interpret single-shot goal stimulus as rewarding. And this can be studied through functional correlation analysis by showing whether stronger encoding in working memory leads to more reliable feedback signals. So we did connectivity, functional connectivity, by looking at pre-choice activity in prefrontal cortex and trying to see if it predicts feedback time activity in regions sensitive to outcomes, like the striatum or the hippocampus. And indeed, that's what we found. We found a significantly stronger connectivity in the goal condition compared to the reward condition between prefrontal cortex and striatum and prefrontal cortex and hippocampus. And this connectivity difference between the two conditions was predictive of working memory performance, as well as difference in learning performance between the two conditions. And very last data slide is we did exploratory analysis to actually ask this question about dopamine. So we did a functional region of interest in the VTA here, and also found stronger connectivity between prefrontal cortex and VTA in the goal condition compared to the classic reward condition. I'll skip this one for time. So the conclusion is that learning from one-shot sub-goals stimuli, they rely on the control network and working memory, but that it does appear to drive canonical reinforcement learning neural signatures rather than a separate goal-directed network. And top-down cortical input may prep reinforcement learning circuits to transform this kind of novel goals into standard rewards. So how do we set the reward function? It seems like working memory helps us transform arbitrary goals into intrinsic reinforcers. I'd like to thank in particular Sam McDougall and collaborators on this project, as well as funding sources and the rest of my lab. Thank you.
A great talk. Thank you so much. It's a very interesting task to be able to study one-shot learning. And I was very curious about what level of accuracy this learning can achieve. So meaning that I'm not sure if I'm correct, but it seems like there was one level of rewards, +1, and then you can transfer that value to the queue in one shot. But I wonder if you have graded level of reward, do you think that the system can learn the different levels of value in one shot?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? Because in this case, this is something, we set this up as being very binary, right? Like you either reach your goal or you don't reach your goal. And in a sense, it's kind of fascinating that it's comparable to just +1 or 0. It shows how arbitrary, I guess, the +1 is versus +10, or if we had used +100 points or something like that, right? But we didn't try to have this gradation, and it's a bit difficult to consider what it would mean in terms of like reaching a goal, or half reaching a goal or something like that. And so I think it could probably, but I think to study this question, we'd have to be able to operationalize multiple levels of reaching goals in a way that wasn't confounded with more classic type of value, which is really the challenge in studying this question.
Yeah, this seems like a very common theme starting from Melissa's talk and also Mark's talk. So yeah, Sarah, do you have any other questions?
So Laura was asking if you think you would find the same behavioral effects of the stimuli across familiar and one-shot conditions were equally complex, like visually, I guess. What she's asking here.
Yeah. So, for example, if we had put a more visually complex outcome for the reward condition or something like that. So the reason we use complex stimuli for the single shot condition is that we needed different outcomes for every single trial, but we also didn't want people to have their own already learned value for them. So we wanted something completely novel. So we couldn't use familiar objects, for example. We could have used fractals for like a single set of fractal that was used in the reward condition, for example. My prediction is that I would have had the same results, although maybe the contrast in the visual cortex would not come out the same way.
Okay. And Dennis was asking about a technical detail. So when you fit the computational model, were goal consistent and goal inconsistent outcome coded as, for example, 1 or zeros or as 3 parameters?
Yeah, that's a great question. They were coded as 1 and 0. We did try a model in which they were coded as 3 parameters, and it did not improve the fit.
Okay. And Sivansh was asking, do you see SC involved in the single shot task? And do you not expect it to be involved?
What's SC? Sorry.
I'm actually also not sure right now. Maybe we can clarify that and put that in the Slack channel, or if you want to message me real quick, then we can look at that. Superior colliculus. Here it comes.
I don't think. No, I don't think we found the superior colliculus in our results. By the way, this paper is in press now, so you can access the preprint is out already, but we didn't find the superior colliculus. No.
Okay, and then Johannes is asking, you framed the sub-goal trials as a model-based map-like task. So reaching a certain fractal could be interpreted as A, reaching a reward, B, reaching a location in a map that happens to be associated with the reward, like in learning a successor representation. Can you distinguish both cases neurally?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you, although my reviewers did not agree with you. I agree with you. Like one way to frame this task is to say that in a single shot goal, you don't use like mal-free values. Instead, you do some form of planning, right? Like you decide to pick the square here because you predict that it's going to lead to this specific type of category of items that is a goal. In that sense, that would be very model based. So I do think I do think we show that that is not the case, and that I think we can distinguish that in a number of ways. One is that we don't see. If that was the case, we should expect to see this model-based network in the brain when we contrast the single-shot goal condition to the choice condition, which we do not. And if that was the case, we should also expect this type of choice to be more model-based, in that sense, to be slower, to have slower reaction times, which we again do not. We were also very interested in this, and but we think that this really those two conditions actually do recruit really similar choice processes, which might be a mixture of model-free and model-based kind of choices, but they don't seem to be differential between the conditions.
Okay, and maybe one quick speculation about the relationship between dopamine and working memory. Could you speculate on how behavior is affected in your task by the fact that dopamine is supposed to affect both learning as well as working memory?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we've really focused on the role of dopamine as a reinforcer here, but not at all on its own role on working memory. So there's definitely a possibility. that we can't rule out and that we can't really, test well in this task. What makes us feel not too worried about this aspect is that this is really a minor, working memory task. It's really very much within participants' capacity to hold, just 2 items in mind and essentially do, a delay match to sample between 2 items and 1 item. So this is very simple for participants. So we think that we're probably in a range where individual differences or at least modulation in dopamine might not have too much effect. But I agree that it's a possibility and that we should consider it in the future.
Thank you very much. Well, I think maybe we can move on. Thank you so much, Anne, and